Deputy Martin Kenny, please.
Thank you, Ken Corlin. First of all, I want to assure you will have our full support of the work you're taking on in respect to what you announced at the beginning of business today. Tánaiste, yesterday 39 people were found in the back of a lorry in England. My thoughts are with their families and with those who had the emergency response people who had to deal with this terrible tragedy. I saw a tweet this morning and it read, "One of those people was the last to die and watched 38 die before them." This is an unimaginable horror, Tánaiste. We have our own tragic history in this country as well in that regard. The owners of the Coffin ships exploited Irish immigrants by cramming them into holes and under the decks. Today, these shipping containers and lorries are the coffin ships of the 21st century. It highlights the human tragedy of displacement and conflict. These coffin containers are what many people fleeing persecution and war have to resort to, Tánaiste, to get to safety. Tackling the criminal gangs behind them who are people trafficking must be prioritised, and they must be put out of business all across Europe. Unfortunately, there are some people in this country who peddle far-right ideology, who may be happy that 39 less immigrants will be coming to Ireland, potentially. The hatred that these people disseminate, mainly through the internet, is regrettably taking root in some places in our society. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, Tánaiste. The language of the far-right use, their tone of speech that they normalise, has taken root among people who would otherwise be decent and reasonable. And that is where the greatest danger lies. It has become acceptable for some people to talk about asylum seekers being dumped in a town. The word dumped insinuates no value. We only dump rubbish. Legitimate concerns that people and communities have about education services or health services being stretched are being twisted into reasons to be intolerant. All of us elected to public office have a duty to stand firm against this, and we must educate and convince people of the dangers of that indirect prejudice and what it produces. This issue goes beyond immigrants and minorities. It is also an issue of class, because in many circumstances around the country where there are proposals to build emergency accommodation or even social housing, we see objection from communities that are excited by hysteria that they don't want those sort of people around them. That is the challenge for you, Tánaiste, and for your government, and for this party, and for all parties. Indeed, your limited policies on social housing or to provide for the underprivileged is always heralded in this chamber. But on the ground, it is the secretaries and chairs of Fine Gael branches and even Fine Gael councillors who lead the protests to block them. I have personal experience right now of senior members of Fine Gael, including a local councillor, whipping up hysteria and demonising people, standing as a bulwark against reason and civil discourse in favour of domination and superiority. Fear-mongering about being overrun has become common and acceptable language.
Thank you, Deputy.
I even hear radio journalists speaking in those terms. Tánaiste, we have a job of work to do in our society. We have to stand for equality and justice every day, the hard days and the easy days. And I want you to assure me that you are prepared to stand against prejudice, that you are prepared and your government is prepared to stand against this sort of thing creeping into our society.
Thank you, Deputy Kenny. Thank you, Tánaiste.
First of all, Deputy, thank you for raising this issue, and let me say on behalf of the government that that the tragedy that unfolded yesterday, the 39 Chinese people, I think 31 men, 8 women, and one of them was a teenager as well, was a reminder of just how ruthless and shocking people trafficking is right now. And this is not simply something that we see in terms of trying to bring refugees from countries like Libya across the Mediterranean. This is an issue that comes right into our own lives, into the UK, and the investigation that's underway at the moment involves Garda Síochána also. And I can assure this House that the investigation by the Essex Police will have the absolute and full cooperation of Garda Síochána. I think it's also important to say that we do have a national action plan to prevent and combat human trafficking in Ireland. It's comprehensive, and Garda Síochána has committed significant resources to investigating and prosecuting in the context of human trafficking, and a specialised Garda unit, the Human Trafficking Investigation and Coordination Unit, has been established and is very much part of that human trafficking strategy. So I want to give that reassurance. The second thing I want to say is to comment on the approach towards asylum accommodation in Ireland. First of all, I want to commend you for what you've said today, and I think it needs to be said by more in this House. We have a legal obligation in this country to protect and look after asylum applicants as we assess their asylum applications. We also, in my view, have a moral obligation to ensure that they are looked after in terms of food and shelter and supports, whether they be medical supports or anything else for that matter. We have done, in my view, a reasonably good job in this country at ensuring that they can integrate into broader society. It's not perfect. Direct provision is far from perfect. But we are trying to improve it all the time. We have an increasing number of people who want to come to Ireland and are coming to Ireland and claiming asylum here. This government is, at the moment, looking for new accommodation for that increased number. We currently have about 1,400 asylum seekers in hotels and B&Bs because we do not have sufficient accommodation to look after them properly. And we need to address that. And we need to address that honestly across the country. And that is what is happening in a number of locations at the moment. There is a need to answer questions fully, though. When communities have concerns that are legitimate, they have a right to ask the hard questions, and they have a right to have answers to those questions. Today, Minister David Stanton is at a meeting with local community representatives and councillors, and I think some TDs also, in relation to the Ballinamore case that you refer to, Deputy. I want to recognise your role in trying to bring a context to the discussion in terms of reassuring local communities that the integration of some asylum-seeking families into their communities can be managed appropriately in a way that doesn't threaten anyone in the community. And that is what we need to continue to do across the country when there are legitimate concerns amongst communities.
Deputy Kenny.
Tánaiste, I understand that, and I don't want to make this, and that's what I'm trying not to do, is make it about the situation in Ballinamore or anywhere else. But you didn't come to the point, which my main point is, that we have a situation here where it's the policy of your government to have direct provision centres for accommodation for asylum seekers. It is your government's policy. And yet around the country we have a situation where other people from other political parties and other community organisations are making a case and saying, look, we have to be reasonable here. And yet people from your party and from other parties are standing up and absolutely demonising us for doing that. Demonising us for doing that. And we have this situation everywhere. We need to recognise this fortress Europe isn't working. We need to recognise that we have to have a legal pathway to deal with this situation. And more than anything else, we have to take responsibility. I mean, it is just absolutely outrageous that these hate speech is becoming normalised and is being allowed to become normalised. And it is. It is becoming normalised. It is becoming acceptable for that to happen. And those of us who are victims of it, who are getting the text messages, who are getting all these threats, are not going to stand down. We will stand firm. But we need to know that the people who are putting those policies in place are also going to stand firm. And that is what you have not answered today, Tánaiste.
Thank you.
I need to hear that from you, and the people need to hear it from you.
Tánaiste, to conclude, please.
Deputy, we're the government that's looking to ensure that we have appropriate accommodation, to invest accordingly, to ensure that we can look after asylum seekers when they come to Ireland properly, until their asylum application has been processed and decisions have been made. And that is why Minister David Stanton is at a meeting, probably as we speak, but certainly today, answering questions. I think it's 2 o'clock today. Answering questions, reassuring people on practical things like GP services, like education, like health support services for vulnerable families that may have been through significant trauma in recent months, which results in them being here as asylum seekers in the first place. And what I would appeal to do, to everyone in this House to do, is to make sure that when we contribute to those discussions and debates, we're doing it in a way that recognises the obligations that we have as a country, that tries to calm sometimes the kind of hysterical language that we hear from some, but in a way that is reassuring. There are legitimate questions that need to be answered, but they can be answered. And there are many, many examples of asylum seekers who have moved, in some cases, into towns and villages without large populations, and the integration has been a success story.
Time is up, Tánaiste, please.
And so we will continue to ensure that we fulfil our obligations to provide appropriate accommodation to vulnerable families in difficult circumstances.
Deputy Brendan Howland, please.
I welcome both the strength and earnestness